What if the biggest thing the Anunnaki gave us wasn't math, or technology, or some secret map of the stars? What if it was something smaller, something almost desperate, a memory pressed into clay by hands that knew the world was about to end? Picture southern Iraq. The desert's quiet, the wind is heavy with dust that once belonged to temples and libraries, carrying the faint fingerprints of scribes who lived 6,000 years ago. Somewhere under that sand, clay tablets wait. Each one is a message in a bottle, not tossed across oceans, but across thousands of years. If you could hold one right now in this still moment, you'd notice its weight. Not just the clay itself, but the weight of someone's hope that memory could survive. That forgetting, really, was the only way to die. So before we start digging into the oldest memories anyone ever bothered to save, take a second, get comfortable, let the world slow down. This story isn't going anywhere. It'll wait for you, just like those tablets waited for centuries. And when you're ready, maybe think about what you'd save if you knew everything was about to vanish. What memory would you press into the clay before the flood came? The story doesn't start with invention. It starts with desperation. Back in 1849, a British archaeologist named Austen Henry Layard started digging up the ruins of Nineveh in what's now northern Iraq. He went looking for gold, for treasure, for royal bling. Instead, he found rooms and rooms stacked with clay tablets. Not one or two, tens of thousands. Small, dusty, covered in wedge-shaped marks that nobody alive could read. The local workers thought the tablets were junk, broken pottery, useless trash. They wanted to clear them out and dig for the real finds. But Layard, maybe he just had a hunch, told them to wrap up every tablet, catalog them, and send them to London for the British Museum. Nobody could read them for decades. Then, in the 1870s, the first translations came out, and they shattered everyone's expectations. These weren't just boring tax ledgers or grain receipts, although there were a lot of those. There were centuries of astronomical observations, medical texts that talked about surgery, laws more complicated than anything medieval Europe ever saw, epic poems about floods, about creation, and maybe the weirdest part, most of these tablets were copies. The scribes, writing around 700 BCE in Ashurbanipal's library, actually wrote down that they were copying from even older tablets. Old Babylonian stuff, Sumerian stuff, records that were ancient even to them, going back so far the trail just disappears. The clay didn't just keep words safe, it kept the urgency alive. Every time a tablet starts with "let this not be forgotten," or "copied from the old tablet," or "written before the ancient words crumble," you can feel the panic. The fear that everything they'd learned, everything they'd built, could vanish, gone without a trace. That's what's so strange about Sumerian cuneiform when you really pay attention. Not just what it says, but why it exists at all. We're told writing showed up because people needed to keep track of stuff. Farming meant you had to count grain, manage workers, mark off land. So, sometime around 3400 BCE, the Sumerians started with simple pictographs. A sheep meant sheep. A stalk of grain meant grain. Slowly, the drawings got more abstract. Eventually, they could say anything they wanted, a whole writing system. That's the story we're taught. Writing as paperwork, writing as a tool for business, writing because you had no other choice in a complicated world. But the ruins tell a different story. Sumerian cuneiform doesn't build up slowly. It just appears, already able to handle abstract ideas, already polished enough for poetry, law, astronomy, even philosophy. The oldest tablets aren't clumsy first drafts. They're finished, refined, like someone designed the whole system from the start, not just stumbled into it. When archaeologists first started digging up Sumerian sites in Iraq, something jumped out at them. The clay tablets weren't just lying around in random piles. People had actually archived them, stacked and stored on purpose in temple libraries, palace vaults, and scribal schools. They organized them, labeled them, protected them. And a lot of these tablets, especially the oldest, were fired in kilns until they turned rock hard, nearly indestructible. That wasn't an accident. Someone figured out that properly baked clay could last longer than stone, longer than wood, longer than any person's memory. Why go through all that trouble to save information if you made it up? Why copy and recopy text so obsessively? Why use set phrases warning scribes not to change a single word? Why treat old tablets with such respect, even when nobody really understood what they said anymore? Maybe they weren't inventing at all. Maybe they were rescuing something. Back in the 1890s, University of Pennsylvania archaeologists dug up the ruins of Nippur, the heart of Sumerian religion, and found a building they called the Tablet House. It was actually a scribal school and a dubba. Kids spent years there learning to read and write. The floors were littered with practice tablets. You could see the process, students copying the same lines again and again, messing up, fixing mistakes, trying one more time. Their exercises included multiplication tables, proverbs about wisdom, and long epic stories like Gilgamesh. Here, what really stood out about those tablets, no one was teaching these kids to create new stories. They were learning to copy. That's what mattered most. The whole Sumerian school system revolved around perfect reproduction. The highest compliment for a scribe was you wrote beautifully, but you copied this exactly. Creativity took a back seat. Preservation was everything. One tablet from Nippur, a teacher's guide, has a line that's puzzled historians for over 100 years. At the end of a long astronomical text, it says, "Written according to the old writing, let no one alter it, from the wisdom of before the great change." Before the great change. What change and when? That tablet is from around 2100 BCE, which is ancient enough, but it's referring to something even older, a time before a transformation so huge, scribes used it to mark history itself. There was a before and after, old wisdom, then a sudden shift. Some researchers think this great change was when Akkadian replaced Sumerian as the main language. Others say it was a political upheaval, a dynasty falling, a new one taking over. But there's another explanation that pops up over and over in the texts, mentioned so casually it's as if everyone already knew. The flood. You see it everywhere in Sumerian stories, Akkadian stories, basically every tradition in the ancient Near East. There's a dividing line before the flood, after the flood. Before the waters, after the waters. It's not just myth, though it reads like one. It's how they kept track of time. The Sumerian king list does it too. Before the flood, kings ruled for thousands of years. After, their reigns suddenly look human. Then the flood swept over. In 1929, British archaeologist Leonard Woolley dug beneath the Royal Cemetery at Ur and found 2.5 meters of clean clay. No pottery, no ash, no sign of people, just a layer of silt dumped by a massive flood. That same layer turns up at other sites like Shuruppak, Kish, Eridu, all dating to around 2900 BCE, all showing the same sudden break. The tablets say something happened. The dirt agrees. When the water finally drained away, the survivors had to rebuild everything, including their own knowledge. This is where the Anunnaki show up, not as aliens or supernatural gods, but as keepers of memory, the ones who held onto what could be saved from before the disaster. The name Anunnaki appears thousands of times in Sumerian and Akkadian texts. Later on, people turned them into underworld gods and cosmic judges. But in the earliest references, the ones stamped into clay before 2500 BCE, they're described in a much simpler way. They're teachers, record keepers, the ones who brought the ME from heaven, the sacred rules, the codes, the heart of civilization. Here, what's odd about the way the early texts talk about the Anunnaki? They're not out there inventing civilization from scratch. They're putting things back together. They're teaching humans skills the texts say people already knew once upon a time, before the flood, before everything changed. Take this one-cylinder seal from Uruk, around 3200 BCE. It's puzzled archaeologists since the day they dug it up. There's a figure in a robe standing in front of a line of kneeling people, gesturing toward what looks like a tablet or a diagram. But the people aren't bowing in worship. They're paying attention like students. They're being shown something. If you look at the symbols above, They mark out divine authority, sure, but the scene itself is about teaching. It's a transfer of knowledge. Someone knows something and they're passing it on. You see this again and again in the oldest artifacts. The Anunnaki showing up not as creators of civilization, but as the ones who rebuild. The ones who restore order, working from some lost blueprint. Now the Eridu Genesis, one of the oldest flood stories we've got, paints a similar picture. It talks about the world before disaster when the Anunnaki were born and cities were built. 5 cities, Eridu, Bad Tabira, Larak, Sippar, Shurapak. Then comes the flood, then nothing. When the water finally goes down, something interesting happens. The texts say people have to learn everything again. The knowledge that was lost has to be given back. Enki, the top Anunnaki god, warns the flood hero Ziusudra to build a boat. But he doesn't just hand him survival tips. He gives instructions on what needs saving. Enki says, "Save the seed of all living things." And that Sumerian word for seed, N-U-M-U-N, isn't just about plants or animals. It means biological seed, agricultural know-how, and the seed of knowledge itself, the core information to restart civilization. When Ziusudra steps off the boat, he's not empty-handed. He carries the ME, those divine principles behind kingship, farming, writing, pretty much everything. The texts say he passes them along. He teaches, he preserves. He becomes a walking archive, a living memory, bridging the drowned world and the new one that has to start over. That's the real gift here. Not flashy technology, but the stubborn, careful effort to keep memory alive after disaster. The Anunnaki in this light stand for that struggle. They're symbols for everyone who tried to save what mattered when the waters rose. Everyone who pressed words into clay. Everyone who fired tablets so the writing would survive. Everyone who taught the survivors what they needed to remember. Follow this line of thought, and cuneiform writing isn't just some bureaucratic tool. It's a technology built to keep memory safe, a system designed to outlast disaster. Think about clay tablets versus other stuff people wrote on. Papyrus burns up, parchment rots, wood falls apart, even stone gets worn down if you wait long enough. But clay, once it's fired, turns into ceramic. It's almost unbreakable. You can drop it, bury it, leave it underwater for thousands of years. The writing stays. Fire doesn't destroy it, it makes it stronger. The same disasters that would wipe out other records actually help preserve cuneiform tablets. That can't be a coincidence. The Sumerians had other options. They used wax tablets for notes, carved important things into stone. But when it came to the knowledge that really counted, the stuff they copied over and over, the wisdom from before the Great Change, they picked clay. Cheap everywhere and basically immortal. Samuel Noah Kramer, the American archaeologist who spent decades translating Sumerian tablets, noticed something that always bothered him. The Sumerians never say they invented their core knowledge. They always say they got it from somewhere else, or copied it from older sources, or remembered it. Even in their most important myths, the language is passive. Kingship was lowered from heaven. Writing was revealed. The arts of civilization were given. Given by who? The texts say the Anunnaki. But Kramer started to think maybe the Anunnaki were just memory, turned into gods. The collected wisdom of everyone who came before, made divine because people forgot where it all started. The teachers became gods because no one could remember the first lesson. At the Oriental Institute in Chicago, tucked away in a drawer, there's this little clay tablet, A7738. Hardly anyone notices it. It's just a student's practice piece from about 2000 BCE, nothing flashy. The text, a hymn to Nisaba, the Sumerian goddess of writing and grain. But if you squint at the tablet's bottom edge, you'll spot a faint line from the teacher. This hymn is copied from the tablet that was copied from the tablet that was in the house of Enki before the waters. Let it not be changed. Before the waters. That phrase pops up over and over in Sumerian writing, almost always tied to knowledge, to the urge to keep things safe. No one can say for sure what the waters really means, but if you look at the digs at Shurapak, Kish, it all points the same way. Around 2900 BCE, a massive flood swept through Mesopotamia. Civilizations before that left their fingerprints behind: pottery, trade routes, metalwork. Then suddenly nothing, just a dead layer in the ground. When people came back and rebuilt, some things stayed the same. They returned to old sites, reclaimed their sacred spaces. But a lot was gone. People had to relearn lost skills, piece knowledge back together from whatever scraps survived. The scribes who lived 1,000 years after that flood didn't see it happen, but they grew up in its shadow. They carried a deep, almost instinctive fear: everything can vanish. Once knowledge disappears, it's probably gone for good. The only way to fight that is to save everything, relentlessly, obsessively, sometimes to the point of paranoia. That's why they copied, why they baked their tablets until they could outlast fire and time, why they hid libraries deep in temples, locked away from thieves and the chaos of the world. Their whole education system revolved around copying things exactly, not inventing new stuff. They knew, better than we do now, what it's like to live after a disaster, to be the generation that has to rescue what little is left. And if the Anunnaki were real, not as gods or ancient spacemen, but as the lost world before the flood, the civilization whose knowledge the Sumerians tried so hard to save, then every tablet turns into a message. Every line of cuneiform is a note to the future. Here, what we managed to hold on to. Here, what survived. Don't let it slip away again. The big lesson isn't about technology. It's about remembering that memory itself is delicate. It needs protection. It needs to be carved into the toughest material around, copied and recopied, passed from hand to hand until it's so deeply woven into people's lives that not even disaster can wipe it out. Today, in the British Museum, the Louvre, Berlin's Pergamon, Penn's Museum, and Chicago's Oriental Institute, hundreds of thousands of Sumerian and Akkadian tablets rest in storage. Most haven't been fully translated. Most will never see a display case. They sit in boxes and drawers, tagged and photographed, but mostly unread. If you could wander through those silent archives at night, you'd be surrounded by the largest trove of deliberately saved memory in all of human history. Every tablet is a choice. Someone decided this was worth saving. Every inscription says, "This matters." And the craziest part, after all this time, we can still read them. A student in 2025 can hold a tablet pressed by a scribe in 2500 BCE and understand the words just as they were meant. That means the plan worked. The memory survived. But memory of what exactly? What did the Anunnaki, or whoever they really were, think was so vital it had to be preserved forever? The answer sprawls across thousands of tablets, and it's not what you'd expect. When scholars started translating Sumerian tablets in the 1800s, they thought they'd uncover prayers, myths, secrets of the universe. And sure, those exist, but the vast majority, maybe 80%, are something else entirely. Ledgers, receipts for grain, records of land sales, lists of who worked where, who got paid, what the temples owned, the everyday paperwork of running a civilization. At first, this let a lot of people down. They wanted epic stories and lost wisdom. What they got were ancient accountants, carefully noting how much barley left the storeroom. Back in the 1960s and 70s, American archaeologist Robert McCormick Adams started looking at those Sumerian administrative texts with fresh eyes. He realized something important. These weren't just dusty lists of transactions. The Sumerians were actually mapping out relationships. Every grain receipt does more than count bushels. It lays out who owes what to whom. Each labor assignment isn't just about work. It shows how the community fits together. A land transfer. It doesn't just mark borders. It tells you who belongs where and even why. Adams argued that these tablets were the Sumerians' most advanced way to hold onto their way of life. They didn't just jot down numbers or records. They captured the whole web of connections that kept their society running, their social contract, right there in baked clay. When disaster hits and everything's in ruins, you can rebuild houses and replant fields. But how do you bring back trust? How do you remember debts, land rights, old promises? which families served which temples, or how traditions actually worked. That stuff's invisible. It evaporates if you lose track. So you write it down. Every deal, every promise, every shift in who owns what or who owes what, you get it on record. Not paper, but clay. That way, even if everyone who understands the system disappears, the next people can piece the whole thing together from what's left. This is what the Anunnaki, those divine teachers, supposedly gave humanity. Not just writing, but a system for keeping track of everything that matters. Not just facts, but memory that lasts. The ME, those divine rules, aren't just abstract ideas. They're instructions for running a civilization. How to manage water, share food, settle arguments, keep the temples going, and teach the next generation. Everything written down, everything saved, all meant to outlast any disaster that might wipe out living memory but leave the clay behind. When French archaeologists dug up Gersu, ancient Lagash, in the 1880s, they found a temple archive stuffed with over 30,000 tablets. Most were from around 2350 BCE under the rule of Governor Gudea. These tablets don't miss a thing: offerings, workers, materials, festivals, guests. It's all there in almost obsessive detail. Nothing gets left out. But here's the twist. Mixed in with the admin records were a handful of literary texts, hymns written by Gudea himself, talking about building a new temple for Ningirsu. And in these hymns, Gudea says something odd. He claims he built the temple according to old plans shown to him in a dream by the goddess Nadaba, Lady of Writing. Old plans, not his own, not something new. He didn't invent it. He got the design as a gift, handed down from earlier times, revealed by a goddess. When they actually excavated the temple, they found some impressive stuff: water channels with perfect slopes, stonework cut just right, even alignments with the stars. None of this was primitive. It was advanced, but Gudea never takes credit for any of it. He says he copied what came before. He restored, not invented. You see the same thing all over Mesopotamian temples, built according to the ancient design, restored to its former glory, renewed as it was in distant days. They're always talking about bringing back the old ways, not showing off something new. Why would these powerful rulers, these master builders, insist on being restorers instead of creators? Why not claim the credit? Maybe because they really believed it. They saw themselves living in a time after disaster, after loss, a world where the best you could do was piece together fragments of what was once whole. In that mindset, innovation isn't a virtue. It means you've strayed from the old truths. The highest goal is to preserve, not to invent. This way of thinking feels alien to us now. We're obsessed with the new, the novel, the disruptive. Innovation is our religion. But for the Sumerians and every Mesopotamian culture after them, the opposite was true. The past held the answers. Their job was to recover and protect ancient knowledge, not to surpass it. If the Anunnaki stand for anything, it's not some lost gadget or secret formula. Their real gift is this uneasy awareness, the feeling that forgetting is always lurking, that memory slips away unless you fight to keep it. Holding on to what matters takes real, stubborn work. There's this scene in the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest stories we've got, that always trips up translators. Gilgamesh, wrecked by the loss of his friend Enkidu, goes hunting for the key to immortality. He hunts down Utnapishtim, the guy who survived the flood and got eternal life from the gods. Gilgamesh hopes for some cosmic loophole, some trick to dodge death. But Utnapishtim doesn't hand over any cheat codes. Instead, he tells the flood story, building the boat, riding out the storm, sacrificing to the gods after the waters drop. Then he throws Gilgamesh a curveball. Immortality isn't for mortals, but something does last. Something outlives us all. The name pressed into clay stays. The deed carved in stone remains. Flesh turns to dust, but words stick around. That's the real secret. Not living forever in the flesh, but living on in memory. The only way to beat death is to be remembered. And to make that happen, You have to write things down. So Gilgamesh comes home, not with some magic plant, but with his own story. His journey gets pressed into clay tablets. People copy it again and again for thousands of years. Libraries from Nippur to Nineveh keep it safe. It ends up in different languages: Akkadian, Hittite, Hurrian. It travels all over the ancient world. And then, one day in the 1800s, someone digs it up and translates it for us. Gilgamesh never cracked the code for eternal life, but his story made it, because someone bothered to write it down, because someone cared enough to keep it going, because somebody realized that it's memory, not breath, that outlasts death. This is what the Sumerian texts say the Anunnaki really taught. Not how to live forever, but how to be remembered forever. It's not about clinging to life, but about passing on knowledge. Civilizations live on when they hand down what they know. And the tool that makes this possible: writing. Especially writing on clay, tough, easy to copy, almost impossible to destroy. Down in the basement of the University of Pennsylvania Museum, there's a storage room packed with shelves of ancient clay tablets. These aren't the fancy ones. They're practice tablets from scribal schools. Kids learning to write, messing up, starting over. The clay was supposed to be erased and reused. Nothing special. But then fire swept through, baking those tablets hard. Accidentally, they survived. Now, 4,000 years later, we can see how a student learned. At first, clumsy lines, then more confident marks, corrections where a teacher stepped in, little notes of encouragement or critique. On one tablet from a school in Nippur, a beginner tries out the opening lines of Gilgamesh. The characters are shaky, but at the bottom, in a steadier, older hand, a teacher wrote, "Persist. What we copy, we preserve. What we preserve outlasts us. What we preserve outlasts us." Every cuneiform tablet carries this belief. That's the real gift from the Anunnaki. Not the invention of writing, other people figured that out too, but the sense of why it matters, why it's worth saving, why you have to teach it, copy it, guard it like treasure. Because memory is weak. Disaster can strike any time. The only way to fight forgetting is to keep preserving, again and again, on purpose. If you take the Sumerian texts seriously, as stories told by real people, not just myths, hear what they say. Once, before the flood, people knew things. They understood time, tracked the stars, ran complex farms, solved tough math. But then disaster hit. The world drowned. Most of what they knew vanished. Most of the people who knew it died. Some people made it. Some ran for higher ground. Some built boats. Some grabbed whatever pieces of their world they could save. When the water finally pulled back, they stood looking at the wreckage and had to decide what to do next. They could just try to remember everything, hope that stories passed from mouth to mouth would keep the past alive. Or they could put what they knew into something tougher than memory. Something that could outlast another flood, another disaster, another long dark stretch where everything seemed lost. They picked clay. They chose writing. They chose to save what mattered most, even if it meant copying instead of creating, memorizing instead of inventing. And they didn't claim this idea as their own. They said the gods taught them. The Anunnaki, those mysterious ones who came from the sky, the keepers of the Me, the divine blueprints. These were the beings, they said, who showed humanity how to remember. It doesn't really matter if the Anunnaki were real people from a vanished world, travelers from somewhere else, or just the old wisdom turned into stories. The gift they gave was clear: the awareness that memory matters, that knowledge slips away if you don't work to keep it. The discipline, the technology, the stubborn refusal to let everything be forgotten. That's why Sumerian scribes closed their tablets with the same lines: "Let this not be altered," copied from the old writing. May it endure forever. Not just prayers, not just ritual words. These were instructions, rules for the future, reminders that writing wasn't about showing off, but about making sure what mattered survived. There's a clay cone in the Louvre now, once buried in the foundation of a temple in Lagash, about 2100 BCE. The inscription is almost like a voice from the past. I, Gudea, ruler of Lagash, have restored this temple to its ancient design. I have written this so that future generations will know that once the gods walked among us, and though they have withdrawn, their wisdom remains if we remember. If we remember. That's the catch. Memory isn't automatic. You have to work at it. You have to copy, to teach, to build libraries, to fire the tablets so they last. An entire culture has to decide that saving the old knowledge matters more than chasing the new. The Sumerians got it. Every civilization that followed in Mesopotamia got it too. For 3,000 years, from the first cuneiform tablets to the very last, scribes kept copying the old words. Even when nobody spoke Sumerian anymore, even when Akkadian, then Aramaic, then Greek took over, they kept those old tablets going. They kept the knowledge alive. Because the alternative, forgetting, was unthinkable. For people who'd seen everything swept away once, forgetting was the real disaster. Gerald Cooper, a scholar at Johns Hopkins, spent years digging into how Sumerian scribes learned their craft. In 2004, he figured out that the average scribe trained for about 6 years. 6 years of drilling, of copying, of memorizing hundreds of wedge-shaped signs, of reading old texts over and over. That's a huge investment, especially in a farming world where every pair of hands counts. Most cultures just can't spare that kind of time, but the Sumerians did. They set up scribal schools in every big city. They trained hundreds of scribes every generation, a whole class of people whose only job was to keep knowledge safe. Why go to all that trouble? Why sink so much effort into something that doesn't make grain grow faster or make temples richer? You can harvest crops without a written record. Temples work fine even if you don't write down the festivals. Laws can live in the heads of judges and elders. But oral tradition is fragile. It warps a little every time someone tells the story. It bends to fit what people need right now. It forgets the awkward bits. In a few generations, what was fact turns into legend, then myth, then something half-remembered and twisted. Writing locks memory in place. It pins it down. Now you can say, this is what happened. This is what we knew. This is how we did it. That fixed memory is what saves a culture when disaster comes. The Sumerians, always looking back at the flood, understood this better than we do. They knew civilization wasn't buildings or cities or even people. It was knowledge carried forward, handed on. And to do that, you need the right tools. You need writing. You need clay that outlasts everything, even stone. Inside the British Library, tucked away in a quiet corner, there's a small glass case. Nothing flashy. It holds a single Sumerian tablet about the size of a phone. The surface is packed with tight, tidy rows of cuneiform signs, just a student's copybook exercise from 1900 BCE. It's a hymn to Nisaba, the goddess who watched over writing. But here's what really grabs you. In the bottom right corner, someone pressed their thumb into the wet clay. You can still spot the swirling ridges thousands of years later. That was the student. 4,000 years gone, and we don't know their name, what they dreamed about, or what kind of person they were. All that got swept away by time. Still, their fingerprint stuck around. Not on purpose, just an accident, but it's here. It's a little echo. The tablets weren't just artifacts, they were made by people. Real hands shaped them. All this effort to remember, to preserve, that's always been a human project. Even the Anunnaki, whether you think of them as gods or symbols, had to trust scribes to do the real work of remembering. If you stand in front of that case, maybe when the museum's empty and the lights are low, something clicks. That print is a kind of memory too. Not like the words, not planned, but just as stubborn. That student had no idea their thumbprint would survive longer than their city, longer than their empire. They were just holding the clay steady, copying out the hymn. But in that moment, they brushed up against something bigger. They joined the longest, messiest, most stubborn preservation project in history. It started before Sumer, rolled through Babylon and Assyria, made it past Nineveh's fires, kept going after Alexander. And somehow, it's still reaching us now. Why did they do all this? Somebody, way back, decided that memory had to win out over forgetting, that saving things mattered more than making new things, that even half-understood scraps of the past deserved to be kept alive. This is what the Anunnaki really gave, the drive to remember, not just astronomy or farming or even writing itself. Lots of cultures figured those out on their own. The real gift is the stubbornness, the refusal to let knowledge slip away. The sense that everything we know is one disaster away from vanishing unless we fight to keep it. The Sumerians grabbed onto that idea, whether it came from gods, old survivors, or their own hard experience. They built a whole civilization around it. They poured energy into training scribes, building libraries, saving tablets. They kept copying texts they didn't even fully understand anymore, hoping that someone down the line would make sense of them. And they were right. When Sumer fell, when Akkad crumbled, when Babylon burned, the tablets survived. The memory survived. Each new civilization in Mesopotamia didn't have to start from scratch. They could rebuild using what the last people had saved. That's what made them resilient. Not just armies or money, though they had plenty of both. It was the chain of memory, the ability to keep knowledge alive, even through chaos, and hand it off to whoever came next. When the tradition finally died and the last cuneiform text got pressed into clay around 75 CE, the words didn't vanish for good. They just went quiet, buried under sand and rubble, waiting for Layard, for Woolley, for the scholars who'd cracked the code, waiting for museums to pull them out of the dark, waiting for someone who could read their stories again. Just waiting, patient as clay. Right now, in a storage room beneath Chicago's Oriental Institute, there are about 40,000 Sumerian and Akkadian tablets that almost nobody has read. They're cataloged, photographed, kept safe. But there aren't enough experts, enough hours, enough lifetimes to get through them all. These tablets are packed with things we've never learned: medical notes, star charts, legal arguments, love letters, business deals. The everyday world of people who lived 4,000 years ago, captured in perfect detail, just waiting for someone to listen. It's a little heartbreaking, honestly. The knowledge is right there, exactly as it was meant to be, but we can't reach all of it. At the same time, it's hopeful. There's more out there, more memory to uncover, more old voices waiting to be heard. The past isn't done speaking, not yet. The Anunnaki, those ancient teachers and keepers of memory, would probably nod in approval. They knew preservation isn't just something you do once and forget about. It's a never-ending job. Memory never comes to us whole. Every generation salvages what it can and passes it on. Hopping the next will keep the chain going. And people are still at it. Across the U.S., places like Johns Hopkins, Penn, Chicago, Yale, Harvard, scholars sit hunched over Sumerian tablets. They're still translating, still trying to piece together the scattered story. They're still working to recover whatever scraps survived from the world's first writers. What started 5,000 years ago in Sumerian scribal schools now lives on in American libraries. Sure, the tools are different: computers instead of clay, digital archives instead of temple vaults. But the mission hasn't changed. Preserve memory, fight against forgetting, make sure knowledge lives longer than we do. That's the real gift, isn't it? The habit of remembering, the technology of preservation, the idea that our biggest responsibility isn't just to invent new things, but to hold on to what's already here. Not to chase after the next big discovery, but to guard the wisdom that came before us, the stuff we keep losing and have to find all over again. That's what the Anunnaki were after, if you believe the old tablets. Doesn't really matter if they were gods, ancestors, aliens, or just symbols. What they handed down wasn't a set of answers, but a kind of awareness. The sense that everything can vanish. That disaster is always lurking. That memory, carefully kept in the toughest material you can find, is your only real defense. And if we're paying attention, If these 5,000 years of Mesopotamian tradition have taught us anything, we ought to take that lesson seriously. Our civilization, with all its digital everything, its clouds and networks and endless backups, isn't any safer than Sumer was. Honestly, maybe we're more at risk because our memory needs electricity, constant updates, and systems that break down way too easily. So what happens when the lights go out? When the servers crash? When the satellites drop from the sky? When disaster hits and all we've got left are whatever scraps survive? Will we leave behind tablets, fired and hidden away, waiting for someone to dig them up and start again? Will we leave instructions, guides, some kind of roadmap for rebuilding? Or will we blow it? Will we put too much faith in tech that fades, in formats nobody knows how to recover, in systems that need skills we forgot to pass on? The Sumerians got it. They wrote on clay. They baked it till it was hard as rock. They hid it in the foundations of temples. They copied it over and over, pouring time and effort into keeping knowledge safe, because they understood what happens if you don't. Their effort paid off. 5 millennia on, we can still read their words just as they set them down. Their knowledge, their warnings, their voices, they're all still here. Somewhere, a teacher once told a student, "What we preserve outlasts us." We can still hear that. We don't know that student's name. The teacher is gone, the school is dust, the city in ruins. The civilization fell over 4,000 years ago. But the words survived, the knowledge held on, the memory lived. That's the gift. That's what the Anunnaki, however you see them, gave us. Not star maps or magic formulas or lost technology. Just this, the habit of memory. The insight that preservation matters. The knowledge that clay fired right outlasts even stone. And if you're hearing this now in the quiet before dawn, maybe half awake, you're part of the same tradition. You're picking up memories from across the ages. You're reaching back to the deep past through words that outlasted their world. This story doesn't stop. It keeps going. Every time we tell it, we copy it. Every time we listen, we preserve it. Every memory passed on is a small win against forgetting. The Anunnaki would see that. They'd get it. Their gift, offered after disaster, made it through empires and ages. Their technology, write it, fire it, keep it, still works just like they planned. And as the night fades and you drift towards sleep, one thought lingers. One question, echoing from the tablets, still waiting for an answer. What do you want to save? Which memory or bit of knowledge do you want to lock up tight, hoping it outlasts you? What truth are you desperate to hand off to people you'll never meet, just hoping they get it, hoping they see what you tried to keep alive? That's really what memory is. That's what it means to preserve something. Every generation faces this choice. Hold on to what matters or let it slip away. Some things are just too important to forget. Some knowledge is just too valuable to lose. Some truths, well, they have to survive no matter what disaster shows up next. The Sumerians made that choice 5,000 years ago. They picked memory over oblivion, clay over silence. They decided to hold onto what the Anunnaki, their gods, their teachers, those strange memory keepers who linked a vanished world to the living one, gave them. And you can still hear that choice echoing. It's there in every museum's back room. In every clay tablet someone managed to translate, in every student puzzling over cuneiform signs, every scholar piecing together scraps of a broken record, every time someone tells the story of the first people who wrote things down, the echo comes through. Memory was the gift. Memory still is the gift. It always will be. As long as someone remembers, as long as anyone preserves the knowledge and carries it forward, the Anunnaki, however you imagine them, did what they set out to do. They taught us that memory can outlive us, that preservation beats death, that a clay tablet once fired can last almost forever. Even now, in the hush among ruins where empires have come and gone, you can almost hear the message whispering from the shards. Remember, keep it safe, outlast the storm. This is what they gave us. This is what's left. This is what has to go on. The tablets sit and wait, tough as stone, tough as memory, as stubborn as our need not to be forgotten. And the story, like the clay itself, survives. But let's stop here for a second. Let's look at what preservation meant for the Sumerians. Their way of keeping memory alive went way beyond just scratching marks into clay. It was a full-blown system, a whole civilization bent on one thing, making sure knowledge could survive anything. Back in the 1950s, in the ruins of Nippur, archaeologists stumbled on something amazing. Yes, they found thousands of tablets, but they also uncovered the actual building where scribes learned their craft. The Adaba, the tablet house, wasn't just some random set of rooms. It was built for a reason, to protect and pass down knowledge. They made the walls extra thick, not just to keep out the heat, but to guard against fire. The rooms circled a courtyard where students worked in sunlight. But the real secret was underground. Under some rooms, they found sealed chambers, storage spaces built right into the foundation, hidden away from looters, floods, or the chaos of war. Inside those chambers, the master copies, the originals that students upstairs copied over and over. If the school burned down or the city fell, everything above ground could vanish, but the knowledge below would wait it out. Someday, someone could dig up the foundations and find what survived. This wasn't just luck or habit. The Sumerians engineered preservation. They got something that even modern archivists would respect. Redundancy keeps things alive. Multiple copies, hidden in different places, behind layers of protection. Temple libraries used the same trick. At Uruk, archaeologists found tablets packed in big ceramic jars, sealed up tight with bitumen. The jars went into brick-lined pits under the temple floor. Even if the building burned, even if the walls came down, those tablets in their jars would sit untouched, safe from fire, water, and time. In the 1980s and 90s, before war made digging impossible, American archaeologist Elizabeth Stone found more than 24 of these underground archive rooms at different Mesopotamian sites. She figured that at the peak of Sumerian civilization, there were probably hundreds of thousands of tablets being read, copied, and studied at any moment. But there were millions more stashed in storage, sealed off, waiting. Waiting for what? Disaster. The next flood, the next war, the next time everything fell apart. The Sumerians lived through loss. They expected catastrophe. So they designed their entire memory system around the idea that someday everything above would fall, but knowledge had to make it through. They lived with this constant sense of looming disaster, and it shaped everything about how they kept their knowledge alive. Writing something down once, that wasn't enough for them. They copied things over and over. Students wrote and rewrote texts. They stored copies in different places. They baked tablets until they were tough enough to survive fire. Sometimes they buried them deep, just in case someone tried to steal or destroy them. Take the British Museum, for example. There's this set of 7 clay tablets. They all tell the same story. It's a Sumerian hymn, and each tablet was found in a different city: Nippur, Uruk, Kish, Lagash, Shuruppak, Eridu. Every big city had its own copy. And yeah, you can spot the differences, spelling changes, different handwriting, little errors fixed in their own ways. But the heart of it, the hymn itself, never changes. Same goddess, same metaphors, same lesson every time. That's redundancy. That's survival by spreading things out. One disaster can't wipe out all 7 at once. One fire won't erase the hymn from the world. The Sumerians had a name for this: scattering the wisdom. You'll see it pop up in old records about how they ran temple libraries. They saw wisdom like grain. It's too risky to keep it all in one place. Spread it out, and if one stash disappears, the rest still survive. Honestly, that's pretty advanced thinking about information. They understood, deep down, that you have to fight against forgetting, against things falling apart or being lost forever. And it worked. When Ur burned down after the Elamites invaded, the city was trashed, palace gone, ziggurat damaged, but the knowledge, Fine, because Nippur had copies. When Nippur got abandoned later, the knowledge lived on in Babylon. When Babylon fell, Assyrian Nineveh had what was needed. Even when Nineveh itself was destroyed, scribes escaped with tablets tucked under their arms, heading for safer cities. Their whole system was tough because it was spread out, and they did it that way because they knew memory, always in danger. But just making duplicates wasn't enough. What's the point of 7 copies if nobody in the future can read them, or if nobody understands what they mean? That's where their schools came in. Scribes didn't just copy things. They got trained to interpret. They learned what the signs said and why they mattered. They joined a community that saw itself as a bridge between past and future. The training was no joke. A 7-year-old would start at the scribal school, the Edubba, and spend the first year just learning how to hold a stylus, cut the reed at the right angle, and press those little wedge marks just right, over and over until it was automatic. The next year, hundreds of cuneiform signs practiced again and again until you could write them without thinking. Lots of copying, sign lists, word lists, phrase lists. Boring, yeah, but if you can't write it right, you can't save it. Years 3 and 4 were all about language, grammar, vocab, sentence structure. Students copied literary texts, maybe not really grasping what they meant yet, but soaking up how Sumerian worked, how their thoughts took shape in those wedge marks. Year 5, things got interesting. Now they studied what the texts actually said: math, astronomy, law, medicine, myths. The teachers explained how it all fit together, why any of it mattered. By the final year, they were junior scribes, copying real tablets for libraries, palaces, and people who needed contracts or records. At that point, they'd become part of the chain, the memory keepers, stretching all the way back to the mythic past. But here's the thing. This wasn't about creativity or thinking outside the box. The whole system was built to produce faithful copyists. The goal was to reproduce what came before, to pass it on unchanged. No room for innovation, just preservation, as exact as possible. On a clay tablet from a scribal school in ancient Ur, a teacher scolds a lazy student. If you don't hold the tablet carefully, if you don't copy precisely, if you don't protect what's been handed to you, you break the chain. You let memory die. You betray the Anunnaki, who trusted humans with this knowledge. Imagine being a child, barely old enough to write, and feeling that kind of weight on your shoulders. You're not writing your own ideas. You're not expressing yourself at all. You're just the link in a long chain, keeping what came before alive. And if you mess up, if you make mistakes or get sloppy, you're not just failing a class. You're helping destroy memory itself. That's why Sumerian tablets are so shockingly accurate, even after centuries of copying. Today, researchers can line up tablets from different cities or whole different eras and find the same texts, almost identical, word for word. Sure, mistakes happen. Scribes were human after all. But errors are rare. Years of training, strict discipline, and a culture obsessed with getting it exactly right created a system that kept texts almost perfectly intact through generations. Now think about oral tradition. Stories passed by mouth change every time someone tells them. The storyteller tweaks things for a new audience, or to fit their own ideas, or just to keep it interesting. Oral tradition is lively and flexible, but it's unstable. A few generations go by, and the original story is buried under newer versions. Writing locks memory in place. It freezes it, makes it solid, hard to change. The Sumerians took this idea and ran with it. Just writing things down wasn't enough. They wanted to make sure what they wrote would never change, not even a little bit, for as long as the tablets survived. That's what you see at the Oriental Institute in Chicago. Tucked away in a quiet corner, there's a case with 3 battered tablets from Nippur. All 3 carry the same hymn to Enlil. They were written by different scribes, decades or maybe centuries apart. The curators lined them up so you can compare, and you'll see the same signs, the same spacing, the same line breaks, even the same little decorations at the end. That's what 6 years of training gets you. That's what happens when a whole culture cares more about keeping knowledge safe than letting it grow or change. The knowledge itself doesn't evolve, it doesn't adapt, it just survives. And for the Sumerians, survival was everything. But why? Why were they so determined to hang on to the past? Why did they believe old knowledge mattered more than new ideas? Why did they see perfect copying as the highest calling, not invention? It all goes back to one thing, again and again, carved into thousands of tablets: the flood, the disaster, the day the world ended and started over. The Sumerians weren't alone. Archaeology shows massive floods all over the ancient world: the Black Sea deluge, the Persian Gulf flooding, Doggerland sinking under the North Sea. Between 12,000 and 8,000 BCE, as the ice sheets melted and sea levels rose more than 100 meters, coastlines everywhere disappeared. Whole worlds vanished underwater, people living there, because they were faced something close to apocalypse. That memory survived for thousands of years as stories, passed from mouth to mouth before anyone could write it down. By the time the Sumerians invented cuneiform and started recording their histories, the memory had turned into the flood myth, the great deluge, the waters swallowing everything, the old world ending so the new one could begin. But the Sumerians didn't just tell the story. They built their civilization on its lessons. If disaster happened once, it could happen again. If knowledge was lost before, it could be lost tomorrow. If floods could wipe out everything people knew, the only defense was to hold onto what survived, so tightly, so redundantly, so permanently that nothing, not even another catastrophe, could erase it all. This is preservation shaped by trauma, an entire culture organizing its knowledge, its schools, even its daily habits around the memory of loss. If the Anunnaki, the so-called divine teachers from Sumerian stories, stood for anything real, whether they were legendary survivors, ancient forerunners, or just the idea of knowledge saved from disaster, their real lesson wasn't about hope or progress. It was about surviving, about hanging on, not creating something new, but keeping what already existed. Their gift was here, how to build a great civilization. It was more like, here's how to keep civilization alive when disaster hits and everything tries to fall apart. That's a completely different way of thinking about knowledge than what most people in the modern West are used to. We usually picture knowledge as this endless staircase. Every generation climbs a little higher, builds on what came before, and moves forward. Progress seems natural, almost guaranteed. We learn, we invent, and the future keeps getting brighter. The Sumerians didn't see it that way. For them, knowledge slipped away over time. Every generation lost a bit more. The past felt bigger, richer, better than the present. The future, smaller, thinner, faded. Their job wasn't to outdo their ancestors, but to lose as little as possible from what the old ones knew. It's the difference between a culture that trusts in its own momentum and a culture still shaken by collapse. Between people who can't imagine losing everything and people who remember, deep in their bones, what it's like when the world falls apart. The Sumerians couldn't forget. Their writings are heavy with longing, regret, and the sense that they lived in the shadow of a better age. Even their greatest kings didn't brag about conquering new lands or inventing wonders. They called themselves restorers. They said things like, "I rebuilt what was ruined. I made ancient things new again. I saved what the Anunnaki gave us." That's not the language of victory. That's the language of holding on, trying to slow the slide, doing whatever you can to keep what little remains from slipping away forever. And the tools they used to fight that slow loss, their writing system, their methodical copying, their habit of pressing words into fired clay, worked better than almost anything else in history. 5,000 years later, we can still read what they recorded. Their warnings, their memories, their voices, it's all still there, whispering, remember, preserve, don't let it fade. Walk into the Louvre in Paris and you'll find the Mesopotamian room. Giant stone statues, models of ziggurats, gold jewelry fit for ancient royalty. Most people crowd around the dramatic stuff, But in a quiet corner behind glass sit a handful of small brown clay tablets covered in tiny wedge-shaped marks. One of them, AO 8865, comes from a school in Nippur. It's just a student's math exercise from around 1800 BCE, working out how to find the area of a weirdly shaped field. The student messed up at one point, caught the mistake, and fixed it. You can actually see where they scraped away the wrong answer and pressed in the right one. At the bottom, the teacher left a note. Error in line 6, but corrected well. Remember, precision in small things preserves truth in large things. What we measure exactly, we remember exactly. Continue. What we measure exactly, we remember exactly. That's the heart of the Sumerian way of saving knowledge. Details matter. Accuracy matters. If you start letting mistakes slide, if you let close enough be good enough, then over generations, the truth blurs and fades. Memory turns into myth, myth into legend, legend into something half-remembered and muddled. Eventually, it's gone. But if you demand precision, if you train scribes to copy every line perfectly, if you check and correct and hold everyone to the same standard, knowledge can survive. Memory stays sharp. The voice of the past comes through, clear as day. That's why math mattered so much in Sumerian schools. Not because everyone needed to be a mathematician, most people just needed to count. But math teaches precision. Calculating a field's area isn't about guessing, it's right or it's wrong. Train your mind to that level of exactness, and you can copy a tablet just as precisely. That's how you keep memory alive. You can really see how this worked if you look at the scribal exercises archaeologists have dug up. Students would copy multiplication tables, do square roots, solve geometric problems, over and over, again and again, aiming for absolute precision. They learned to think in exact terms, real numbers, clear relationships, everything measurable. Later, when they moved on to copying literary texts, that same sharp focus stayed with them. No paraphrasing, no summaries, no close enough. Just straight copying, word for word, sign for sign. That's what it took to preserve something. There's a set of tablets in Yale's Babylonian collection that really shows this off. They call them the Gilgamesh schoolroom tablets. You can actually track one student's journey as he learns to copy the Epic of Gilgamesh, year after year. The first tablet is rough. The signs wobble, sizes jump around, the kind of thing you'd expect from a beginner. There are mistakes everywhere, misspellings, skipped lines. The student is struggling, trying to get it right, but not quite there yet. A year or two later, the second tablet looks better. The signs line up, the mistakes are fewer, the spacing improves. The student's starting to get the hang of it. By the third tablet, near the end of training, you see almost no errors. The handwriting looks professional. One tiny mistake, quickly fixed, that's it. The last tablet, if someone hadn't marked it as a student copy, you'd think a master scribe made it. That's what years of discipline get you. That's preservation by training, turned into a technology. But here's the kicker. When scholars put that final student copy next to master versions of Gilgamesh from temple libraries, they see something wild. The student's copy, done around 1750 BCE, matches tablets from 500 years earlier. Half a millennium apart, different cities, different teachers, but the text holds steady. That's the real victory of the Sumerian preservation system. It worked exactly the way they wanted. Knowledge didn't just last a few decades, it survived for centuries, barely changed. And it kept going. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written before 2000 BCE, was still being copied in Ashurbanipal's library around 650 BCE. More than 1,300 years of scribes passing the story down. Through wars, dynasties, the collapse and rise of empires, the tale lived on because scribes stuck to the rules, copying every line, every sign, generation after generation. When archaeologists dug up Nineveh in the 1850s and opened Ashurbanipal's library, they found thousands of tablets. Most were just business records from the Assyrian Empire. But hidden among them were copies of Sumerian texts that were already ancient when those scribes copied them. Ashurbanipal, ruling in the 7th century BCE, actually sent scribes across his empire to hunt down old tablets and copy them. He was collecting memories, gathering scraps of the past, making sure Sumerian knowledge didn't vanish, even though Sumer itself had disappeared more than 1,000 years earlier. Why bother? Because the drive to preserve had sunk deep into Mesopotamian culture. Every new civilization in the region, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, they all saw themselves as heirs to Sumerian wisdom. The tablets mattered, not because they were old, but because of what they held inside. So everyone kept copying, preserving, and passing it on. That chain lasted for 3,000 years. From the first Sumerian scribes around 3400 BCE to the last cuneiform texts around 75 CE, the tradition never really broke. Knowledge got copied and recopied, protected and handed forward, because every generation believed in one way or another that memory was sacred, preservation was a duty, and forgetting was a kind of death. And then slowly it ended. Over a few centuries, cuneiform faded out, replaced by alphabets, Aramaic, Greek, Arabic. The old signs stopped making sense. Tablets turned into curiosities, then rubble, then just building material. Whatever was written in them became locked away. For 1,800 years, roughly 100 CE to 1850, nobody on Earth could read cuneiform. The tablets survived, hundreds of thousands of them buried all over Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Iran. But they were silent. The memory was still there, but the key was lost. The Anunnaki's gift failed, not because the technology broke or the tablets crumbled, but because nobody passed on the knowledge of how to read them. The scribal schools shut down. The tradition just stopped. So even though the words sat there, perfectly preserved in clay, nobody could understand them anymore. That's the weak spot in any preservation system. Saving information isn't enough. Somebody has to know how to unlock it. Somebody has to keep the tradition alive, teach the next group how to read the old signs. If that link breaks, it doesn't matter how well you store the memory, it's gone. So the tablets waited. They sat in the ruins, silent and tough as stone. They didn't rot or fade, but nobody could hear what they had to say. Not because they were destroyed, but because the key to understanding them got lost. Then came the 1850s, and everything changed. A few stubborn scholars started to crack the code. It all kicked off with the Behistun inscription, a massive message carved into a cliff in Iran by King Darius I around 500 BCE. It was written in 3 scripts: Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian cuneiform. Henry Rawlinson, a British scholar, risked his neck climbing up rickety scaffolding just to copy these strange marks. Because Old Persian was partly readable, it gave the scholars a foothold, a way to start unlocking Akkadian. Once they figured out Akkadian, they realized many tablets had glossaries. Akkadian words matched up with Sumerian. That gave them a backdoor into reading Sumerian itself. By the 1880s, people could finally read Sumerian again. At first, they stumbled through it, making plenty of mistakes. But as more tablets turned up and more minds worked on the language, the old voices grew clearer. The chain was back. After nearly 2 millennia of silence, the tablets spoke again. And what did they say? The same thing they'd always said: here, what we saved; here, what we knew; here, what we tried to protect when disaster struck. Don't let it slip away again. Now, all over the world, in universities, museums, research centers, scholars keep reading the tablets. New translations pop up every year. Fresh discoveries keep coming from these slabs of clay pressed by hands 4,000 years ago. The tradition lives on. Sure, the technology and languages have changed, the settings look different, but the heart of the mission hasn't budged. Keep memory alive, fight forgetting, pass the knowledge forward. That's the Anunnaki's gift, still working, still needed. The danger they warned about, the risk of losing everything, hasn't gone away. If anything, it's even more real now. Think about it, our digital storage. It's way more fragile than clay. Hard drives break down, servers fail, file formats get outdated. All this knowledge we're stashing away in ones and zeros desperately needs someone to keep it alive. Lose power, lose infrastructure, let a few decades go by without maintenance, and our digital memory could vanish just like cuneiform did. The Sumerians got something that we've missed. Passive preservation beats active maintenance. Fire a clay tablet once and it just sits there, waiting. Leave it alone for 5,000 years, dig it up, and you can still read it. Try that with a hard drive. Ignore it for 50 years and see what you get. This isn't about romanticizing clay tablets or pretending we should go back to the Bronze Age. It's about seeing that the Sumerians actually solved a problem we still haven't cracked. How do you save knowledge through disaster? How do you build memory that outlasts the world that made it? Their answer was simple but genius. Write on clay, fire it hard, bury it deep, make lots of copies, spread them out, teach the next group to keep copying, treat preservation like a sacred duty, value memory more than novelty. It worked for 3,000 years. Through wars, floods, fires, toppled dynasties, destroyed cities, the knowledge held on, because the system was built to last with preservation at its core. And even when the worst finally happened and the tradition broke, the memory didn't die, it just waited. Eventually, someone came along and brought it back to life. This is resilience. This is survival. This is what it really means to keep memory alive across ages. The Anunnaki, call them gods, ancestors, aliens, or just symbols, understood this. Their lesson holds up, no matter how you see them. Memory disappears if nobody cares enough to keep it. Knowledge fades unless someone steps up to save it. The whole chain snaps if one generation drops the thread. That's the real test, choosing to care about preservation instead of just chasing after the next new thing. Valuing memory over forgetting, holding onto the past instead of racing blindly into the future. That's the gift. Not the technology itself, not even the words pressed into clay. It's the awareness behind it all, the understanding that we're part of a long relay. We inherit knowledge. We're meant to pass it on. Maybe our highest calling isn't to invent something brand new, but to make sure what's old doesn't vanish forever. This is what the tablets say in the quiet corners of museum basements. This is what the fingerprints of ancient scribes still try to tell us. This is what the Anunnaki, whoever they were, wanted us to remember after disaster. Remember, preserve, endure. And as the night settles in and this story becomes just one more link in the chain, the lesson sticks. What we save outlasts us. What we remember pushes back against death. What we give to the future lives on. The clay waits, memory holds, the story isn't finished. Even now, somewhere in the ruins of southern Iraq, tablets hide under sand, unseen, unread, waiting with the patience only fired clay knows. Waiting for the next memory keepers, waiting for someone to mend the chain, waiting to speak after so much silence. The gift was memory. The gift is memory. It always will be. As long as someone chooses to preserve, the Anunnaki's purpose survives. But let's go deeper. There's more here, a question we haven't quite faced. Why does memory matter? Why is preservation sacred? Why did the Sumerians and all the Mesopotamian cultures that followed care so fiercely about staying connected to the past? It's not obvious to us now. We live in a world that worships the new, the innovative, the disruptive. We're told to challenge tradition, question everything, invent ourselves from scratch. The past, that's just baggage. Progress means cutting loose old ideas. For the Sumerians, it was the opposite. The past wasn't a burden, it was a treasure. Not something to escape, but something to reclaim. Deep down, at the root of their civilization, they believed the past was better than the present. You see it everywhere in their stories. The Sumerian king list gives impossibly long reigns to ancient kings before the flood. After that, reigns get shorter, more human, more fragile. It's not just a myth, it's a worldview. The past was bigger, the present's a shadow. The future will shrink even more unless we fight to save what's left. Same thing in their creation myths. The gods make humans, teach them everything, set up a perfect world. Then the gods leave, grow distant. Direct contact fades. People have to keep things running, but nobody completely understands how. We copy, but we don't always know what we're doing. We save what we can without fully grasping it. That's how the Sumerians saw themselves, living in the ruins of something greater. Their whole civilization was about fighting decline, slowing the loss, holding onto as much as possible before it all slipped away. At first, this all sounds pretty bleak, maybe even a little defeatist. Why would anyone want to build a civilization on the idea that the golden age is already over? But there's actually something deeply wise here. If you think the best days are in the past, you start to see preservation as the most important thing. If you believe knowledge keeps piling up, that every new generation knows more, you stop worrying about losing the old stuff. Who cares? The new stuff's better anyway. But let's flip that. If you think we're losing knowledge, that each generation actually knows less, that the real wisdom is buried in the past, then suddenly preservation feels urgent. It's not just important, it's sacred. Lose something old and it's gone for good. You can't get it back. And honestly, if you look at history, the Sumerians kind of had a point. Civilizations rise and fall. Huge chunks of knowledge disappear. Alexandria burned. The Maya lost their writing system. Easter Islanders forgot how to make those giant statues. The Romans couldn't even build their own aqueducts after a while. Loss isn't rare, it's normal. Forgetting happens all the time. Thinking knowledge just naturally builds up and never really vanishes. That's a modern fantasy, not something history backs up. The Sumerians weren't guessing. They lived through it. Whether you take the flood as a real disaster or a symbol for some massive cultural wipeout, it marked the end of a world. Afterwards, the Sumerians made it their mission. Never again. Whatever scraps of wisdom survived, whether from the Anunnaki or just picked out of the rubble, they guarded it like treasure. They made copies and then more copies and took care not to let anything slip away. That's not pessimism. That's realism with a stubborn streak. Loss happens. Forgetting is always right around the corner. Maybe we live in the shadow of better ages, but what matters is what we do about it. We can let knowledge fade or we can fight for it, one careful copy at a time. The Sumerians chose to fight. They built a civilization on that stubborn act of resistance. If you ever wander through the Penn Museum in Philly, you'll find the Sumerian collection tucked away across a few quiet floors. There's this little exhibit almost nobody visits, a recreation of a scribal classroom from ancient Nippur. It's nothing fancy, just brick benches where students sat, a platform for the teacher, a mess of clay tablets all over the floor. Some are blank, some are half-finished, some show mistakes that got scraped off and fixed. But what really gets you is the silence. That gallery is almost soundproof. When you stand there, you hear nothing. No city noise, no footsteps from other rooms, just pure stillness. And in that stillness, you can almost imagine it. The scratch of a reed stylus on wet clay, the quiet muttering of kids repeating lessons, the teacher hammering home why every little mark matters, why copying things perfectly is a sacred job, why this work will outlast kings and empires. Picture a kid, maybe 12, hunched over his tablet. His hands ache. His eyes are blurry from squinting at those tiny wedge marks. He's copied the same multiplication table 15 times, and he'll do it 15 more tomorrow. He doesn't really get why this is so important. All he knows is the teacher doesn't let mistakes slide. But years later, when he's the teacher, copying out old tablets, some so ancient he barely understands them, he'll get it. He'll know he's just one link in a chain that stretches back to the Anunnaki and forward to people who haven't even been born yet. His job, as dull as it may seem, is the thing that stands between remembering and forgetting. That's what the Sumerian scribes pulled off. They didn't see themselves as inventors. They saw themselves as memory keepers. Their job wasn't to add something new, but to hold on as tightly and faithfully as possible to what was already there. This flips everything we think we know about scholarship on its head. Today, scholars are supposed to break new ground, come up with fresh ideas, challenge old ones, push their fields forward, saving what's already known. That's for archivists and librarians, not real academics. But the Sumerians saw it differently. For them, preserving knowledge meant everything. Creating something new wasn't a mark of genius, it was suspicious, maybe even reckless. The best scholars weren't the most inventive. They were the ones who could copy perfectly, who kept the tradition alive just as they'd received it. And honestly, there's something smart about that. How often does new research just mean stumbling onto something our ancestors already figured out and then forgot? You see it again and again. Big discoveries that turn out to be recoveries of old truths. Think about the Antikythera mechanism, that wild ancient Greek machine that nobody could match for 1,000 years after it sank. Or Roman concrete, stronger than what we use now, but the recipe vanished, and only recently did people manage to piece it back together. Or how Islamic scholars kept Greek philosophy and math alive, while Europe fell into the Dark Ages. If they hadn't, so much would have been lost for good. It's the same story over and over. People build up knowledge, lose it, and then have to claw it back. Every time that happens, it's a tragedy, a waste of human effort, whole lifetimes spent rebuilding what once existed. The Sumerians weren't having it. Their whole culture was about breaking that cycle. They wanted a system so tough that knowledge could ride out disasters, wars, floods, the whole mess, and reach the future unchanged. And you know what? They pulled it off. Today you can pick up a Sumerian math tablet, run the numbers, and see they got it right. Their records of the stars still check out. Some of their medical recipes actually work, thousands of years later. 4 millennia of chaos and the knowledge survived. That's not luck. It's the result of people spending their lives copying, teaching, and caring about precision. The culture made it happen. But it only worked because generation after generation cared enough to keep it going. Scribes devoted their lives to copying. Teachers demanded accuracy. The whole society valued keeping the chain unbroken more than chasing the next new thing. So here's the uncomfortable part. What about us? What are we really preserving? Are we making sure anything important will make it through whatever disasters are coming? Sure, our digital archives are massive. A cheap flash drive can hold more than the biggest ancient library. We've got databases and backups and redundant servers all over the place. On the surface, our knowledge looks safer than ever. But it is. It's actually more fragile than ever. Everything depends on active upkeep, electricity, working hardware, the right software, people with the skills to access it all. A clay tablet doesn't care about any of that. Dig it up, brush it off, read it. 5,000 years later, it still works as long as someone knows the script. No batteries, no machines, just human eyes and brains. Meanwhile, our knowledge is locked away in formats that could outlive us or not. And we're not teaching people how to preserve it, just how to invent new systems, build new tech, disrupt everything. So what happens when those systems fail? When the old file formats get tossed and the new ones don't quite fit? When the power goes out, the servers crash, and the cloud is gone for good? How much will make it through? How much will be left to rediscover? Honestly, the Sumerians would be worried if they saw how we're handling things. They'd see a mountain of information, but no safety net. Everything's complicated, but nothing's built to last. We're obsessed with innovation, but we barely stop to think about what slips away in all that change. They'd probably ask, where are your clay tablets? Where's the knowledge that doesn't need electricity or special tools to survive? Where's your commitment to keeping the chain unbroken just because it matters, not because it's profitable or trendy? Let's be honest, we barely have any of that. We've staked everything on active preservation, systems you have to babysit, tech that gets outdated in a blink. We're exposed in ways the Sumerians guarded against. Maybe we've forgotten, or maybe we never really learned. The lesson the Anunnaki supposedly handed down: memory fades. Disaster isn't a question of if, but when. Saving knowledge takes effort, and you have to actually choose to do it. Down in the basement of the Smithsonian, there's something hardly anyone talks about: the Human Document Project. Basically, it's an effort to make a modern Sumerian tablet. The idea: store the most important stuff, science, math, farming, medicine, etched onto nickel plates tough enough to last millions of years. No batteries, no fancy tech, just a microscope and you're set. Pure information, locked in the toughest thing we've got. It's a beautiful idea, but it's tiny. Just a handful of researchers, barely any money, almost zero support from the culture at large, because we don't really care about preservation the way the Sumerians did. What gets us excited is innovation, the next big thing, progress. So we're not really planning for the day when everything vanishes. We just assume things will keep rolling along. Assume the servers keep humming, the networks stay up, the data stays accessible. Assume future generations will have what we have. The Sumerians, they figured it would all fall apart. They planned for disaster. They expected the people who came after them to start from scratch, not stand on their shoulders. And they designed their whole system around that. Who had it right? The optimists betting on progress, or the pessimists bracing for collapse? Honestly, history sides with the pessimists. Civilizations fall, knowledge disappears, and when the dust settles, the only things left are what people bothered to really, truly preserve. Clay tablets stick around, digital files vanish, clay survives, the cloud, not so much. That's the lesson, the one we lost, the one the Anunnaki supposedly tried to hammer home. The Sumerian scribes knew it. Their whole society was built around not losing what mattered. Here we are, surrounded by all this tech, more powerful and more fragile than ever. Maybe it's time to rethink things. What are we saving for the future? Are we putting our knowledge into forms that will last? What do we owe to the people who come after us, who might not be as lucky? These aren't easy questions. They poke holes in our faith in progress. They hint that maybe we're headed toward loss, not gain. That maybe our grandkids will know less, not more. That preservation, not innovation, is what actually matters most. But the Sumerians lived with those questions every day. Their answer: write it on clay, fire it hard, bury it deep, make copies, teach the next generation. 3,000 years later, their words are still here. Our answer: store it all digitally in formats that always need power and the right hardware, and hope someone keeps the lights on. We haven't tested that against real disaster. We don't know if it'll work. The Sumerians knew their way worked. They'd seen it survive. Maybe it's time we listened. Time we remembered what the Anunnaki, those old memory keepers, tried to say. Memory is sacred. Preserving it is a duty. Sometimes the most important thing isn't making something new, but making sure what we already have doesn't disappear. Properly fired clay outlasts stone. Words, if they're copied and cared for, outlast centuries. Knowledge, if you guard it, can make it through anything. We live in an age of abundance and fragility. Maybe it's time to ask if we're really saving what matters for the long haul. The tablets are still down there in the basements. The imprints of ancient hands are still pressed in the clay. The voices from 4,000 years ago are still there, whispering. What you preserve will outlast you. Are we paying attention? Are we doing our part? Are we choosing to keep memory alive even when it's inconvenient? The Sumerians made their choice. They built everything around it. It lasted 3,000 years. We're still reading their tablets, still borrowing their wisdom. What will people in the future say about us? When they dig through our ruins, what will they find? Will anything be left to save? Or will we go down as the era of endless stuff and endless knowledge, followed by losing it all in one big wave of forgetting. The decision's in our hands, just like it was in theirs. Every generation has to figure out what's worth keeping and how to actually hold on to it. The Anunnaki didn't give some gadget or secret library. Their real gift was the wake-up call. You don't get memory for free. It takes work. If no one bothers to remember, knowledge vanishes. That's what mattered, being aware of the stakes. Not fancy tech, not some hidden wisdom. Just a stubborn insistence that memory only sticks if someone fights for it. If we're smart, we'll take a lesson from those old scribes, people who spent whole lives copying out tablets they barely understood, just because the act of saving knowledge felt sacred. We'll do what they did. We'll pick memory instead of forgetting. We'll put real effort into making things last, not just picking whatever's easiest. We'll save what counts, and we'll do it in ways that can handle disaster. Because disaster, always coming. Maybe not tomorrow, but it always shows up. When it does, when the floods come, or the lights go out, or the world just falls apart, the only things that'll make it through are the things we decided on purpose to save for the long haul. Clay tablets will still be readable 5,000 years from now, but will any of our hard drives? Will the cloud? Will our digital lives survive at all? The Sumerians would probably laugh at the idea. They knew what it was to lose everything, and their doubts are probably wiser than our blind faith that next year will look just like this one. So, as you drift off tonight, as your mind starts to slip toward dreams, listen to what the clay whispers in the dark. Remember, save, endure. Pick what matters, make it last. Pass it on, keep the chain unbroken. Respect the memory keepers, honor the gift. That's what the Anunnaki taught, whether they were gods, ancestors, aliens, or just symbols. The Sumerians carried that message for 3,000 years, copying and teaching, keeping the line alive. This is what we've been handed. This is our turn. This is what we owe the future. Memory is the gift. Preservation is the job. Clay survives. Knowledge lives on. The story keeps going. Somewhere in the shadows of old cities, in museum basements, in university archives, the tablets wait. Tough, patient, still here. They're waiting for the next person who cares enough to remember. Waiting for someone to take up the work. Waiting for us to choose to save our story again. The choice never goes away. The gift never disappears. The memory is out there, pressed into clay, baked hard, holding steady across the ages. All we have to do is decide. Save it, respect it, pass it along. That's the gift. That's the lesson. That's the truth that outlives any empire. Memory matters. Saving it is sacred. What we hold onto beats death. The tablets know this. They've been proving it for 5,000 years. Maybe it's time we listened. So as the story winds down, as night sinks in and sleep pulls you under, let's go back one last time. Back to the clay, to the fingerprints set in wet earth 6,000 years ago, to the people who knew their time was almost up. Picture them not as old names in a book, but as real people. They got tired. Their hands cramped. They made mistakes and fixed them. They probably wondered if what they did mattered at all. They never knew that 5,000 years later, strangers would dig up their tablets, store them in chilly archives, spend years learning to read their marks, or argue about what a single sign really means. They couldn't imagine their work would outlast everything they knew, their empire, their cities, their language. But the clay held on. They didn't keep knowledge alive because they knew it would work. They did it because it felt necessary. Because letting memory die, letting everything slip away, was just unthinkable. What will people say about us years from now? When they dig through what's left, what will they actually find? Anything worth saving, or just piles of junk and a mountain of lost information, forgotten in one sweeping crash? It's our move, same as it was for everyone before us. Every generation faces the same question: what's worth keeping, and how do we make sure it actually survives? The Anunnaki didn't hand out some magic tool or a secret stash of wisdom. Their real lesson was simple and kind of harsh. Memory isn't free. It takes effort. Stop caring and watch everything disappear. That's the real point, understanding what's at stake. It's not about gadgets or some hidden truth. It's about refusing to let things slip away without a fight. If we have any sense, we'll learn from those old scribes, the ones who spent their lives copying out clay tablets, half the time not even fully getting what they were writing. But they did it anyway, because saving knowledge felt important, almost holy. We can do the same. We can choose to remember instead of just letting things fade. We can put in the work to make things last, not just take the easy way out. We can protect what matters and do it in ways that might actually hold up when disaster hits. Because disaster always comes. Not necessarily tomorrow, but it's coming sooner or later. When it does, when the floods hit, or the power's gone, or the world just stops working, the only things left will be what we deliberately chose to carry forward. Clay tablets are still readable after 5,000 years, but what about our hard drives, our cloud storage? Will anything digital make it? Honestly, the Sumerians would probably find our confidence pretty funny. They knew what it felt like to lose everything. Their doubts were probably a lot smarter than our blind faith that next year will be just like this one. So as you're about to fall asleep tonight, just listen for a moment. Imagine the clay whispering through the dark. Remember, save, hold on. Pick what matters, make it last. Don't break the chain, respect the keepers, honor the work. That's what the Anunnaki really taught, whatever you think they were. Sumerians carried that message for 3,000 years, copying, teaching, passing it down, refusing to let the line die. Now it's ours, our turn. This is what we owe the future. Memory is the gift, saving it is the job. Clay survives, knowledge sticks around, the story keeps rolling. Somewhere in forgotten cities, in museum basements, in the quiet corners of universities, those tablets still wait. Tough, patient, still here. They're waiting for the next person who cares enough to pick up the thread, waiting for someone to do the work, waiting for us to make the choice to remember. The choice never goes away. The gift never really disappears. Memory, still out there, pressed into clay, baked to last, holding out across centuries. All we have to do is choose, save it, respect it, pass it on. That's the gift, that's the lesson, that's the truth that outlives every empire. Memory matters, holding onto it is sacred. What we save is what beats death. The tablets know, they've proved it for 5,000 years. Maybe we should finally pay attention. So as the night settles in and sleep drags you under, let's go back one last time. Back to the clay, back to those fingerprints pressed into wet earth 6,000 years ago, back to people who could feel their own ending coming. Picture them not as dusty names, but as real people. Their hands got tired. They made mistakes and fixed them. They wondered if any of it mattered. They had no idea that 5,000 years later, strangers would dig up their work, lock it away in archives, spend years trying to read the marks, or argue over a single sign. They never imagined their work would outlast their cities, their language, their whole world. But the clay held on. They didn't save knowledge because they knew it would survive. They did it because they had to, because letting everything fade away was impossible to accept. And whether our digital lives make it or not, the clay tablets are still here, patient, tough, legible, proof of a civilization that really understood what it meant to keep something alive, maybe better than we do now. Maybe that's the real gift the Anunnaki left us. Not just the knowledge they supposedly handed down or the systems they built to keep it safe, but the example they set. They showed us something important. If we're intentional about it, knowledge can survive even after everything else falls apart. Memory can outlast whole civilizations if we take the time to encode it right. Even a broken chain can be mended as long as someone's willing to do the work. This isn't about wishful thinking. It's not the kind of hope that says, "Don't worry, nothing bad will happen," or "Progress will just keep rolling forward." It's a tougher, more grounded hope, the kind you get from seeing proof that deliberate preservation works, that if you set up the right systems and actually keep them going, knowledge can make it through disasters that wipe out everything else. Look at the tablets. They don't just hint at the idea, they prove it. That's 5,000 years right there, thanks to nothing fancier than clay, fire, and a steady hand copying the words. It's not theory or speculation. It's a living demonstration. If we really wanted to, we could do the same. We know how. We could build modern versions of those tablets, storage that lasts, that doesn't need any tech to read. The real question is, do we care enough? Do we value memory enough to put in the effort? Do we think it's worth thinking about the far future? The Sumerians did. They built their whole society around this idea. They trained scribes for years just so they could copy texts. They fired even the most trivial information into clay. They built library after library, each one a backup against disaster. Each one a vault for memory. That's what a civilization looks like when it takes preservation seriously. When it gets that memory is fragile, that it needs protecting. When it believes its most important job isn't just to invent new things, but to keep the old knowledge alive. If we're being honest, we're not like that. We don't treat preservation as a priority. We put our faith in tech that always needs attention, always needs to be plugged in or patched or upgraded. We just assume things will keep running, even though history should have taught us better. We're vulnerable, exactly where the Sumerians were strong. And it's because we've forgotten the lesson the Anunnaki supposedly tried to teach. Catastrophe will come. Memory is fragile. Preservation takes real, ongoing work. Maybe this story, this look at how the Sumerians handled memory, can shake us out of our digital daydreams. Maybe it can remind us there was wisdom in those old ways. Clay tablets, careful copying, keeping lots of backups. Wisdom we've lost in our rush to put everything online. We can still learn from them. We can borrow their principles and adapt them. We can build preservation systems that don't need servers or electricity to work. We can choose, just like they did, to value memory more than novelty, durability more than speed, preservation over endless growth. This isn't about nostalgia. It's not about pretending the past was perfect. It's about facing the truth. The Sumerians actually solved a problem we're still struggling with: how to keep knowledge alive through the long dark, through disaster, through the fall of everything that made it. They did it with clay. We might find our own way, but we have to find a way, trusting that our servers and clouds and drives will just last forever. That's not wise. That's just hopping for the best. So when the next disaster hits, when the grid goes down, when the data centers go silent, what will be left? What will archaeologists dig up from our world? Will they find anything that can last? Anything that can speak the way Sumerian tablets still speak to us? Or will they find only rot and silence? The choice is still ours. The Anunnaki made their choice and passed it on. The Sumerians took it seriously for thousands of years. Now it's up to us. And those ancient tablets pressed by hands long gone are still here, reminding us what's possible when a culture cares enough to preserve. They last, they endure, they speak across 5,000 years. So as you drift off, as this story fades and dreams take over, remember this. Memory is a choice. Preservation takes willpower. What we decide to save in forms that truly last is all that stands against the passing of time. The Sumerians knew it. The Anunnaki, however you picture them, taught it. The tablets prove it. If we're wise, we'll pay attention. We'll choose as they did. We'll preserve what matters. The gift has always been memory. That's it. Memory, yesterday, today, tomorrow. If you keep memory alive, it never really dies. The clay remembers. Those old fingerprints pressed into tablets remember. The scribes who spent their lives copying, yeah, they knew the truth. And now maybe we finally get it too. So rest, let yourself dream, and when you wake up, hold on to this. What we keep safe, what we remember, it outlasts us. The chain isn't broken, memory hangs on, the story refuses to stop. Somewhere in the quiet corners of museums and buried deep in the dirt, the tablets wait. They're patient. They're tough. Fired clay doesn't crumble easy. They last because people have always needed to be remembered. Those tablets are still speaking, still teaching, still carrying the knowledge the Anunnaki shared, the Sumerians guarded, and now, somehow, it's ours to hold. The gift moves on, so does the duty. The choice lands in our hands. When we say yes to it, when we pick remembering over forgetting, preservation over oblivion, we honor all the ones who came before us. The ones who copied by hand, the ones who fired the clay, the ones who hid those tablets, hoping someone would find them. The ones who decided, I won't let this disappear. That's the gift, that's the lesson, that's what survives. Memory preservation, clay that outlasts whole empires. And the old quiet voice still whispering, don't forget, don't let memory fade, save what matters, pass it on. Those tablets have kept their promise for 5,000 years. Can we do the same? It's not about saying the right words, it's about what we actually do, not just knowing but carrying it forward, not just admiring but keeping it alive. The chain's in our hands now, the gift is offered, the responsibility's clear as day. All it takes is a choice. To keep, to remember, to last. That's what the Anunnaki showed. That's what the Sumerians did. That's what the tablets prove. And right now, before you drift off, that's what we inherit. The gift of memory, the work of preservation, the promise to continue. Let's be worthy of it. Let's make the right call. Let's keep faith with what matters. For everyone who came first, for everyone who comes next, for the sake of memory itself. The clay is still here. The knowledge is still here. The story isn't done. And as you let go, as sleep comes, remember. What we keep safe outlasts us. What we remember beats death. What we pass on becomes forever. That's the truth. That's the promise. That's the gift. The tablets know. The Anunnaki knew. The Sumerians proved it. Now it's our turn. Sleep, dream, remember. And when you wake, maybe you'll save something that matters. Write it down, pass it on. That's how memory lives. That's how knowledge survives. That's how the gift keeps moving. One generation after another, one choice at a time, tablet after tablet. The chain holds because someone decides not to let go. Let's be those people. Let's make that choice. Let's save what counts. For the future, for the past, for the always now of memory. The tablets are waiting. The knowledge survives. The gift is still here. All it takes is our choice. To keep, to remember, to pass it on. That's the gift. That's the way forward. That's what lasts. Memory, clay, the fingerprints of ancient hands reaching through time. And our own hands right here reaching back, picking up what they left for us, carrying it on. The chain, the memory, the gift. It's ours now, just like it was theirs, just like it will be for those who come next. Let's be worthy, let's choose well, let's keep it safe. For memory, for the future, for the gift itself. This is what the Anunnaki taught. This is what the tablets hold. This is what survives if we choose it. Sleep now, the clay will wait for you. The memory will last. The gift will still be here. Patient, waiting, unbroken. As clay survives, as memory endures, as the story goes on. Always.